I think we are live. Hi, Facebook.
Hi, Facebook.
Hey, Nix, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's Michelle and Nikki here from Being More Human, and we wanted to go live for you today to have a discussion in and around bullying, and particularly, I guess, bullying in general, given that it is the National Day of helping to
Raise awareness bullying.
about bullying and violence. And I guess as a context, given that we are in a business and HR consulting frame, we deal and have in our careers dealt a lot with bullying in different forms. So maybe, Nikki, if you can just tell us what some of the key things are when you think of this topic. It's a massive topic that has a big impact for people and can be very emotional. But what are some of the things that come into your mind when we start thinking of bullying?
Some of the things are, we were talking about this earlier, bullying does happen a lot in the workplace. We're hearing a lot about it in schools and happening online with keyboard warriors. What I was thinking about earlier was, are people always aware that they are bullying? That really interests me. And
great question. So do they get out of bed in the morning and go, right, I'm going to be an arsehole today to the people that I work with, and they rock up into the office and they're just the worst version of who they can be?
Yeah, and they're purposely making people's lives hell.
Great question. So is there intent, basically?
Yeah. Or is there something going on for that person that they're then putting that out to other people? The other thing that I think about a lot when I think about bullying in the workplace is an extreme version of bullying that happened in Melbourne a while ago.
Yeah, what was that one?
That was in a cafe where the owner, 3 men, the owner and 2 other men pinpointed one girl called Brody, and they kept pushing her until she attempted suicide. When she returned to work, she still kept returning to work. And this is what interests me and what we've been talking about. She returned to work, and the first comment that was said to her was, next time do it properly. So next time she did do it properly.
And in fact, I think that's the story that has now enshrined a piece of legislation in and around bullying called Brody's Law,
which her parents started. And now there's a recent case this year which is being highlighted today, is Dolly. So Dolly's a 14-year-old girl who was bullied relentlessly online. And she drew a picture before she died, and the picture was a stunning photo of a woman or a girl, and it said, speak even if your voice shakes. And that's
what do you think she meant by that? Because that's a fascinating quote, really. Speak even if your voice shakes is very powerful. What do you think she was meaning when she wrote that?
I wonder if she was thinking if she had spoken up, even though she was scared to speak up. I'm very much speaking of what I imagine.
Your interpretation.
My interpretation. I wasn't there. I don't know her circumstances. But if she had spoken up, even though she was frightened to do it, would the outcome have been different? And that's what I think is really important. When we think about in the workplace, for example, when somebody's feeling bullied or when it is happening and there's evidence it's repeated behaviour, are they speaking up? Are conversations happening? Are the people who are seeing it, are they speaking up?
Because if you think of it, speaking up in a context like that is a very brave, courageous thing to do, and you potentially put your own neck on the line if you're going to report this kind of behaviour that's happening to you in the workplace. So it can be, you can wonder what's in it for me to speak up. Sometimes it's not so much about what's in it for you, but it's more about what's in it for the greater good and what's in it for people that are kind of going to come after you. Because one thing we do know about investigating bullies and allegations about bullies in the workplace is a true bully will have multiple victims. So they're not going to just rock up to work one day and be horrible and nasty to one person. They're actually going to do that to a range of people. So you will be somewhere in that story, you know, in that range.
Yeah. And in workplaces, when I've talked to people when they come to me and, you know, we ascertain, is this bullying? Because the word bullying can be thrown around quite a bit.
Yeah, so what is bullying? If you had to give a definition around it, how would you define it?
It's repeated behaviour.
Okay.
And it can be
So if I'm nasty to you once, that just makes me nasty as opposed to a bully.
Yeah. Nasty once, it still doesn't mean that we don't have to have a conversation, but if you're nasty to me once, being evolved, I would hopefully feel confident to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
So that it stops it in its tracks and it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But it's that incidence of repeated behaviour. It could be on grounds of discrimination, or it mightn't be on grounds of discrimination. It's ongoing behaviour that you see in the workplace. So one of the things that we just watched a clip from the project, which we can put.
Yeah, it's well worth watching. Actually, if you didn't catch it last night, we will put the link in the live.
And one of the statistics there was that 40% of bullying stops if the person is approached,
chooses to speak up.
So
that's amazing if you think about it. 40% of it. That's a massive number, and the fact that it stops because you're bold enough to open your mouth. That's quite impressive as a strategy.
Absolutely. And that's what that's the biggest thing with being more human. We talk about having a conversation because so much happens out of misunderstandings and not in understanding the impact that you're having.
Exactly. And I think that's super important, and that's something that I notice all the time working with clients and with individuals, particularly when you're coaching, is the difference between someone's intent, so they get out of bed and they intend to be like this, in comparison to the actual impact that they have. And sometimes the intent that you have can actually be 180 degrees opposite to the impact that you are having. And one of the reasons it's important to speak up is because sometimes bullies actually genuinely don't know they're being bullies. And again, I'm just kind of coming up with an amount that I think is true based on my experience in workplaces. And I would say only 10 to 20% at the maximum of bullies that I've encountered in workplaces, either through investigating allegations or some other way, actually genuinely have known that their behaviour is having a negative impact. The rest of them are blissfully unaware. And it doesn't excuse it. I'm not saying for a second it excuses it, but it's really interesting then when you start to look at the dynamic and how it works.
And bullying isn't necessarily about, as you're saying, the person's intention. It's how the other person receives it. So another person can receive something in a totally different way based on their life experience and how they deal with the world.
So I could do a particular behaviour with you in our relationship and you'd be perfectly fine with it. Then I could do exactly the same behaviour with someone else in another relationship and they would not be fine with that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why it can be quite confusing to work out, what is and what isn't. What the other thing I'm interested in is we always discuss bullying from this framework of, the bully and the victim. I'm interested in the victim, and I say that in commas. What role does the victim play, and what can the victim do that is often not being done in this process?
That is speaking up. It's letting it happen to you. And often, people can be so beaten down by it. And I talk to people and say, why? What have you done? And why aren't you doing anything? And they say, oh, no one will listen. Nothing will happen. And I would argue, you can be in a business where you keep saying nothing will happen, but it's this, as we were talking before, the more people that actually will speak up and will not accept it, then that's when change can happen.
That's exactly right, because otherwise then you get the whole dynamic around a culture of bullying, and a culture of bullying at its most systemic level in an organisation can be very dangerous. It can be very, very insidious, and it can take a long time to shift and to change. And in fact, in many organisations, it can actually be driven from the CEO and the executive team down. So I think that layer of it is interesting. In terms of being part of Being More Human, how do you see the way that we operate and some of the things that we try to do with each other on a daily basis to make sure that we have a respectful space to work in, an environment to be in?
What I've noticed about us is we've all got a good sense of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So we're also not afraid to have a conversation.
Yep.
So if things aren't working for us, we will speak up. Mm-hmm. We all share values, and the work that we do, we will make sure that we're living those values. So we're all starting from the same set of expectations.
Yeah, so the agreement about what's okay around here is the same.
Yeah. And then pushing that out to how we work with our clients. To me, it is always the very first step is helping our clients have that conversation. So before we go down the track of performance management and policing something, it's about what conversations have been had so far and what support do you need to resolve this, what outcome do you want to see, and how do we help you get there without in a way that you and the other person will grow,
can feel like that you've learnt something from it and you're moving on, I should say. And I just think that there's so many different things that we do within businesses, and one of the themes that keeps coming through, and certainly in the conversation about bullying, is about learning how to treat people with respect. And sometimes people can assume that respect is kind of warm and fuzzy and fluffy. And while there's an element of respect that is warm and fuzzy and fluffy, there's also an element of respect that is actually very direct. And I'll just give an example. Recently, last week, we were having a meeting about the ownership of Being More Human. And one of the things we talked about is we're going to have to learn how to fight, because there will come a time where we don't like each other, or we don't agree with what each other's saying. And so just to put it on the table, that we have to learn how to fight with each other.
How are we going to fight without it becoming personal?
Yes, in a way that's constructive and that we can move forward. And I think that's the worst thing about a bullying environment is the power and control that is at the heart of that kind of a dynamic. And I think that's what makes people feel like they're victims, feel like they're disempowered, feel as though they can't have a voice. But it's the catch-22 until they actually do, then that perpetuates itself.
And that was the message that we saw on the project last night, is if you're the recipient of bullying behaviour, speak up even though your voice shakes. If you see bullying behaviour, speak up even though your voice shakes.
Don't be the apathetic bystander.
Don't let it keep happening because it's not happening to you. So just let it, for the greater good, speak up. If you're an employer, make sure it's really evident to your people that your door is open and that you will hear and you will listen and you will act.
And if you're an employer, make sure that you do your full diligence around your responsibilities in this area, whether it's making sure that you are regularly revising or even have a policy in the first place, right through to making sure that your team have regular bullying and harassment or respectful workplace type training. Right through to sort of individual one-on-one coaching, so that you're helping to build capability within people to have those difficult conversations, because all of those things are not only they're your obligation, but they're the things that you will do that will create a constructive kind of culture around you, and you will reap the benefits of that in spades.
And I think the pattern that I see so much is that people don't know how to have that conversation as a starting point. The other person who is dealing the behaviour, giving out that behaviour, doesn't know what impact it's having. So things become way worse than they need to become. Because people just aren't equipped to have a brave conversation.
And it's that classic sort of crisis curve, isn't it? Like, if you have the conversation at this point, then you stop the explosion at that point. But if you don't have it here, and in fact you ignore it there and pretend it's not happening here, then the explosion is inevitable. It will happen, and it won't be pretty, and it will cost you a lot from your own emotional well-being, as well as it's very resource draining in an organisation to constantly be needing to investigate these things. It's just exhausting. Aside from the fact that it's very expensive. So guess what? If you work in a business that has a very bullying, negative-based culture, they will be spending a lot of money on investigating those allegations when they could be investing it otherwise. Yeah. So, yeah. Anything else that you wanted to wrap up with just at the end?
I think the main message for today, and I've been following Dolly's Dream Facebook page, the main message is to just have each other's backs and to not accept unacceptable behaviour.
Yeah. Don't tolerate what you can otherwise change if you had the courage to speak up. Yeah. If you need any kind of support at all in this area, whether it is about developing a policy or training your people or coaching in and around this space, you can find us at 3Ws, beingmorehuman.com.au. And if you have any other comments or questions that you'd like us to address or to answer, feel free just to pop them into the feed below. And apart from that, we'll put the link to the project from last night. Yeah. And I think that's us.
That's us.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Have a fantastic rest of your afternoon. Cheers.